I am going to talk about vampires now because I believe that they are the creatures the people we know as reptilian shapeshifters metamorphose in after their deaths. And then they possibly move away to the land of Nod or Shambhala, that is situated in the hollow earth, where they'll be less conspicuous, but more about that in another video. A vampire is a being from folklore that subsists by feeding on the vital force, generally in the form of blood, of the living. In European folklore, vampires were undead beings that often visited loved ones and caused mischief or deaths in the neighborhoods they inhabited when they were alive. But all the stories about vampires didn't start with Bram Stoker's 1897 novel Dracula, that was popularized in many movies and TV shows. Vampiric entities have been recorded in most cultures. The term vampire was popularized in Western Europe after reports of an 18th-century mass hysteria of a pre-existing folk belief in the Balkans and Eastern Europe that in some cases resulted in corpses being staked and people being accused of vampirism. According to some etymologists, the word vampire comes from Serbian language, from word operati, which means to push plumb teeth into someone's throat, or it could just be the misheard word dampir, which is a conjunction of two Albanian words dam, teeth, and pir, drink. Dhampir is, by the way, a creature that is the result of a union between a vampire and a human, which is something that is supposedly happening quite often, because vampires are lustful dead people and they like to visit the women they find attractive during their lifetime in their beds. It is usually the case that the male vampire seduces human female and makes her pregnant with his child, not so much the other way around, although there are such cases as well. It appears that there are less female vampires, or at least, less loving ones. Another less widespread theory is that the Slavic languages have borrowed the word from a Turkic term for witch, ubyr, and Tatar language. In some parts of the region, last names such as Serbian Vampirović, Vampijerović, Vampiric, thus Bosnian Lampijerović, etc. Drakulić, literally meaning vampire's son, are used, and in another the child is named Vampir if a boy and Vampirica if a girl, or Dampir if a boy and Dampirica if a girl. Dhampiraj is also an Albanian surname. Legends state that vampires were normal members of the community, except for being able to sense vampires, having power of telepathy, practice sorcery, see the future, often starting careers as vampire hunters, which would be practiced for generations from father to son. That's why in Bulgarian folklore, numerous terms such as glog, vampirdzia, vampir, izadagia, and svetocher are used to refer to both vampire children, descendants, as well as to specialized vampire hunters. Some traditions specify signs by which the children of a vampire can be recognized. Albanian legends state they have untamed dark or black hair and lack a shadow. In Bulgarian folklore, possible indications include being very dirty, having a soft body, no nails and bones. The latter physical peculiarity is also ascribed to the vampire itself, and a deep mark on the back, like a tail. In contrast, a pronounced nose was often a sign, as were larger than normal ears, teeth or eyes. According to J. Gordon Melton, from his book, The Vampire Book, the Encyclopedia of the Undead, in some areas, a true dhampir possessed a slippery, jelly-like body and lived only a short life. Jure Grando Alilović or Grando was a villager from the region of Istria, in modern-day Croatia, who may have been the first real person described as a vampire in historical records. He was referred to as a strigoi, strigon or strigon, a local word for something resembling a vampire and a warlock. Jure Grando lived in Kringa, a small town in the interior of the Istrian Peninsula near Tingen. He died in 1656 due to illness, but according to legend, returned from the grave at night as a vampire, strigon, and terrorized his village until his decapitation in 1672. Anna and Nicola Alilović, daughter and son of Jure, fled from Istria to Volterra, Italy at young ages. The legend tells that for 16 years after his death, Jure would arise from his grave by night and terrorize the village. The village priest, Giorgio, who had buried Jure 16 years previously, discovered that at night somebody would knock on the doors around the village, and on whichever door he knocked, someone from that house would die within the next few days. Jure also appeared to his terrified widow in her bedroom, who described the corpse as looking as though he was smiling and gasping for breath, and would then sexually assault her. When Father Giorgio eventually came face to face with the vampire, he held out a cross in front of him and yelled, "Behold Jesus Christ, you vampire! Stop tormenting us!" The bravest of the villagers, led by the prefect Miho Radetic, chased and tried to kill the vampire by piercing his heart with a hawthorn stick, but failed because the stick just bounced off of his chest. One night later, 9 people went to the graveyard, carrying a cross, lamps and a hawthorn stick. They dug up Jure's coffin, and found a perfectly preserved corpse with a smile on its face. Father Giorgio said, "Look, strigon, there is Jesus Christ who saved us from hell and died for us. And you, strigon, you cannot have peace." They then tried to pierce its heart again, but the stick could not penetrate its flesh. After some exorcism prayers, Stipin Milasic, one of the villagers, took a saw and sawed the head off the corpse. As soon as the saw tore his skin, the vampire screamed and blood started to flow from the cut. According to folklore, peace finally returned to the region after Jure's decapitation. Petar Blagojević was a Serbian peasant who was believed to have become a vampire after his death and to have killed 9 of his fellow villagers. The case was one of the earliest, most sensational and most well-documented cases of vampire hysteria. It was described in the report of Imperial Provisor Frombold, an official of the Austrian administration, who witnessed the staking of Blagojević. Blagojević died in 1725, and his death was followed by a spate of other sudden deaths after very short maladies, reportedly of about 24 hours each. Within 8 days, 9 persons perished. On their deathbeds, the victims allegedly claimed to have been throttled by Blagojević at night. Furthermore, Blagojević's wife stated that he had visited her and asked her for his opansy shoes. She then moved to another village for safety reasons. In other legends, it is said that Blagojević came back to his house demanding food from his son, and, when the son refused, Blagojević brutally murdered him, probably via biting and drinking his blood. The villagers decided to disinter the body and examine it for signs of vampirism, such as growing hair, beard and nails, and the absence of decomposition. The inhabitants of Kisilova demanded that Frombold, along with the local priest, should be present at the procedure as a representative of the administration. Frombold tried to convince them that permission from the Austrian authorities in Belgrade should be sought first. The locals declined because they feared that by the time the permission came, the whole community could be exterminated by the vampire, which they claimed had already happened in Turkish times. They demanded that Frombold himself should immediately permit the procedure, or else they would abandon the village to save their lives. Arnold was forced to consent. Together with the Veligogradiste priest, he viewed the already exhumed body and was astonished to find that the characteristics associated with vampires in local belief were indeed present. The body was undecomposed, the hair and beard were grown, there were new skin and nails, while the old ones had peeled away, and blood could be seen in the mouth. After that, the people, who grew more outraged than distressed, proceeded to stake the body through the heart, which caused a great amount of completely fresh blood to flow through the ears and mouth of the corpse. Finally, the body was burned. Arnold concludes his report on the case with the request that, in case these actions were found to be wrong, he should not be blamed for them, as the villagers were beside themselves with fear. The authorities apparently did not consider it necessary to take any measures regarding the incident. The report on this event was among the first documented testimonies about vampire beliefs in Eastern Europe. It was published by Wienerisches Diarium, a Viennese newspaper, today known as Die Wiener Zeitung. Along with the report of the very similar Arnold Paole case of 1726 to 1732, it was widely translated west and north, contributing to the vampire craze of the 18th century in Germany, France and England. Arnold Paole, an early German rendition of a Serbian name or nickname, perhaps Arnold Pavla, died c. 1726, was a Serbian haiduk who was believed to have become a vampire after his death, initiating an epidemic of supposed vampirism that killed at least 16 people in his native village of Medveda, located at the West Morava River in Trstenik, Serbia. Paole's case, similar to that of Petar Blagojević, became famous because of the direct involvement of the Austrian authorities and the documentation by Austrian physicians and officers who confirmed the reality of vampires. Their report of the case was distributed in Western Europe and contributed to the spread of vampire belief among educated Europeans. Knowledge of the case is based mostly on the reports of two Austrian military doctors, Glaser and Flukinger, who were successively sent to investigate the case. Scholars have suggested that Paole's case has influenced the depiction of vampires in popular culture texts. The first outbreak. This outbreak is only known from Flukinger's report about the second epidemic and its prehistory. According to the account of the Medveda locals as retold there, Arnold Paole was a haiduk who had moved to the village from the Turkish-controlled part of Serbia. He reportedly often mentioned that he had been plagued by a vampire at a location named Gosowa, perhaps Kosovo, but that he had cured himself by eating soil from the vampire's grave and smearing himself with his blood. About 1725, he broke his neck in a fall from a hay wagon. Within 20 or 30 days after Paole's death, 4 people complained that they had been plagued by him. These people all died shortly thereafter. 10 days later, and 40 days after Arnold's death, the villagers, advised by their haiduk, a military, administrative title, who had witnessed such events before, opened his grave. They saw that the corpse was undecomposed with all the indications of an arch-vampire. His veins were replete with fluid blood, and that fresh blood had flowed from his eyes, nose, mouth, and ears, that the shirt, the covering, and the coffin were completely bloody, that the old nails on his hands and feet, along with the skin, had fallen off, and that new ones had grown. Further, his body was red, his hair, nails and beard had all grown again. Concluding that Paole was indeed a vampire, they drove a stake through his heart, to which he reacted by frightful shriek as if he were alive, groaning and bleeding, and burned the body. That done, they cut off his head and burnt the whole body. They then disinterred Paole's four supposed victims and performed the same procedure, to prevent them from becoming vampires as well. The second outbreak. About 5 years later, in the winter of 1731, a new epidemic occurred, with more than 10 people dying within several weeks, some of them in just 2 or 3 days without any previous illness and others after 3 days of languishing. The numbers and the age of the deceased vary somewhat between the two main sources. Glazer's report on the case states that by the 12th of December 13 people had died in the course of 6 weeks. Glazer names the following victims, here rearranged chronologically: Malika, a 50-year-old woman; Miloš, a 14-year-old boy; Jakov, a 15-year-old boy; Petar, a 15-day-old boy; Stana, a 20-year-old woman, as well as her newborn child, which Glazer notes was buried behind a fence where the mother had lived due to not having lived long enough to be baptized; Vusica, a 9-year-old girl; Sava, a 30-year-old wife of the High Duke; Rid, a 24-year-old man; and Ruzica, a 40-year-old woman. The sick had complained of stabs in the sides and pain in the chest, prolonged fever and jerks of the limbs. Glazer reports that the locals considered Malika and Stana to have started the vampirism epidemic. According to his retelling, Malika had come to the village from Ottoman-controlled territories 6 years before. The locals' testimony indicated that she had always been a good neighbor and that, to the best of their knowledge, she had never believed or practiced something diabolic. However, she had once mentioned to them that, while still in Ottoman lands, she had eaten 2 sheep that had been killed by vampires. Stana, on the other hand, had admitted that when she was in Ottoman-controlled lands, she had smeared herself with vampire blood as a protection against vampires, as these had been very active there. According to local belief, both things would cause the women to become vampires after death. According to Fluckinger's report, by the 7th of January, 17 people had died within a period of 3 months, the last 2 of these apparently after Glazer's visit. The flow of investigation. On the 12th of December 1731, Glazer examined the villagers and their houses. He failed to find any signs of a contagious malady and blamed the deaths on the malnutrition common in the region as well as the unhealthy effects of the severe Eastern Orthodox fasting. However, the villagers insisted that the illnesses were caused by vampires. At the moment, 2 or 3 households were gathering together at night, with some asleep and others on the watch. They were convinced that the deaths wouldn't stop unless the vampires were executed by the authorities, and threatened to abandon the village in order to save their lives if that wasn't done. Failing, Glazer consented to the exhumation of some of the deceased. To his surprise, he found that most of them were not decomposed and many were swollen and had blood in their mouths, while several others who had died more recently, namely Vusica, Sava, and Rid, were rather decomposed. Glazer outlined his findings in a report to the Jagodina Commandant's office, recommending that the authorities should pacify the population by fulfilling its request to execute the vampires. Glazer furthered Glazer's report to the Supreme Command in Belgrade. The city was then held by Austrian forces. The Vice-Commandant, Botta-d'Adorno, sent a second commission to investigate the case. The new commission included a military surgeon, Johann Fluckinger, 2 officers, Lieutenant Colonel Butner and J.H. von Lindenfels, along with 2 other military surgeons, Siegel and Johann Friedrich Baumgarten. On the 7th of January, together with the village elders and some local gypsies, they opened the graves of the deceased. Their findings were similar to Glazer's, although their report contains much more anatomical detail. The commission established that, while 5 of the corpses, the High Duke's wife and child, Rid, and the barge actor's wife and child, were decomposed, the remaining 12 were quite complete and undecayed, and exhibited the traits that were commonly associated with vampirism. Their chests and in some cases other organs were filled with fresh, rather than coagulated, blood. The viscera were estimated to be in good condition. Various corpses looked plump and their skin had a red and vivid, rather than pale, color, and in several cases, the skin on hands and feet, along with the old nails, fell away on their own, but on the other hand completely new nails were evident, along with a fresh and vivid skin. In the case of Malika, the High Dukes who witnessed the dissection were very surprised at her plumpness, stating that they had known her well from her youth, and that she had always been very lean and dried up. It was only in the grave she had attained this plumpness. The surgeon summarized all these phenomena by stating that the bodies were in vampiric condition, vAMpIres. After the examination had been completed, the gypsies cut off the heads of the supposed vampires and burned both their heads and their bodies, the ashes being thrown in the Morava River. The decomposed bodies were laid back into their graves. The report is dated the 26th of January 1732, Belgrade, and bears the signatures of the 5 officers involved. Sava Savanović was said to have lived in an old watermill on the Rogačica River, at Zarašće village in the municipality of Bajina Basta. It was said that he killed and drank the blood of the millers when they came to mill their grains. Although he is usually said to have been the first Serbian vampire, there are claims that he was predated in Serbian folklore by Petar Blagojević from Velikograd's day, who died in 1724. Blagojević and the affairs surrounding him came to European attention at the time, under the name Petar Blagojević, and represented one of the earliest examples of vampire hysteria. Still, Sava Savanović remains today as the best-known vampire in Serbia. After 90 years, the story of Serbian vampire Sava Savanović is a Serbian novella by Milovan Glišić, first published in 1880. It's noteworthy that this novel was published 17 years before Dracula, not because it influenced Stoker, since it wasn't translated into English until 2015, but because it depicts vampire elements that are not the conventional ones Stoker popularized. Rather, Glišic's novella draws on folklore and is more true to the original vampire tradition as a result. Now, that novel is not the exact rendering of the original story, but it's considered pretty accurate. It goes like this. There is a village in Serbia in which a wealthy man, Zivan, who is the Komet mayor or leader of the village, has a beautiful daughter named Radojka. The young man, Strahinja, is in love with Radojka, but Zivan refuses to let Strahinja marry her. Zivan's anger causes Strahinja to leave the village. He ends up going to the neighboring town where the villagers are having a serious problem. They have no miller, and whenever they get one, he is found dead in the mill the next day, usually with a red mark around his throat as if he had been hung. At this point, the villagers do not realize they are up against a vampire. It's significant that there is no mention of bite marks on the victim's neck. Instead, the vampire seems to suck out his victim's blood simply by touching them. Unfortunately, the novel is not gruesome enough to show us the vampire preying on his victim, so it's left somewhat unclear how he satisfies his bloodthirst. Stravinja decides he will play Miller to solve this mystery. He hides up on the mill's loft with 2 pistols to see what might threaten him. Enter the vampire. He comes into the mill and Stravinja can see he is a tall man with a face as red as blood, and over his shoulder he carries a shroud which stretches down to his heels. The vampire then says out loud to himself, "Oh, Sava Savanović. For 90 years you've been a vampire, and you've never gone without supper as you have this evening." Quote, Stravinja needs no more information than to know his enemy is a vampire before he decides to shoot him. When the smoke from the pistols clears, the vampire is gone. Stravinja goes to the other villagers, who are amazed he is alive, and tells them his story. They have never heard of anyone named Sava Savanović, but they decide an old woman in the village, Mirjana, might know of him because she is older than 90. Mirjana says she remembers Sava from her youth and that he was an evil man. She then tells the villagers where he was buried. Of course, the villagers are now determined to find Sava's grave and destroy him. To do so, they need 3 items: a black and ungelded horse who will be able to locate the grave, holy water, and hawthorn stakes. The villagers, with the help of the horse, find the grave. The horse seems to sense where the vampire lies and starts digging in the appropriate place. Once the grave is dug up, the villagers open the coffin and find Sava lying there, his corpse undecayed and looking bloated from drinking blood. They plan to pour holy water down his throat, but they spill it, which awakens him. They have warned each other not to let a butterfly escape from his throat. It is considered that soul can take a shape of a butterfly, so if butterfly would escape, unclean spirit would escape with him as well. Apparently they would have drowned it with the holy water. But the butterfly does escape. Regardless, they stab the body with the hawthorn stakes to kill the vampire, and they tell themselves it's no matter that the butterfly escaped because it can't hurt grown people. Quote, the villagers then decide that, because of Stravinja's bravery, he deserves to marry Radojka. They make a plan to kidnap her, which Stravinja argues against but finally gives into, and so Radojka is abducted. Her father comes after them and tries to shoot the abductors, but in the end, he comes to his senses and Radojka and Stravinja are married. As for the butterfly, it's said that it killed several children before finally disappearing from the region. Beside the fictionalized novel around events surrounding vampire Sava Savanović events, there was also the Pobredom, a Slav novel that contained numerous Slavic folk tales in it, including mention of vampires, translated into English in 1895 by Professor P. Jones. But even these forementioned vampires weren't first vampires, because as one could have guessed, before the 20th century many people were illiterate and many vampire legends would be passed down by the means of oral tradition from one generation to the next. It was, as one could imagine, bad way of keeping records, and the stories would be passed down completely unchanged only for a couple of generations. But when the age of literacy began, people began writing down the stuff they noticed in the world around them, and such was the case with vampire legends as well. In other words, people didn't just start to see vampires and didn't come to the conclusions about their predatory behaviors, about the ways to protect from them, and about the ways to kill them at that point in history completely out of the blue. The best proof for that is that vampire legends are persistent among all the cultures of the world, be it in the form of etheric beings, different demons, incubi, succubae, ghosts, be it as traditional vampires, be it as some divine or half-divine creatures that would on some occasions help people. but on another devour them, be it in the form of animal spirits that consume blood, be it hybrid creatures created by gods that are cannibals, for example, Cyclops, no matter the degree of literacy. Well, since the Age of Enlightenment has begun in Europe in mid-18th century, many famous authors and philosophers of that time started to collect different European myths and legends. In Serbia, the man that did most such work was VUK Stefanović Karadžić. I can't remember exactly if he was the only source for me to find out about Serbian vampires. I doubt it, but anyway I will go by my memory here and won't cite any sources, so it might not be 100% accurate information. Given that there are secret societies ruling over us, they could decide all of a sudden that some information should have stayed hidden, depending on how widespread it got, and erase them from all history books, even the old ones, at this very point in time, without hesitation. So what is true today might not be true tomorrow. So as you could have noticed, here in Serbia we had many peasants that were vampires, and that started whole vampiric pandemics, like Petar, Blagojević, Sava, Savanović. Unlike the aristocracy that makes up the most of the popular cases of vampire epidemics in other countries, like Countess Elizabeth Bathory in Hungary, Count Dracula or Vlad the Impaler of Romania, Count Gilles de Rais of France. In fact, it is not known whether they infected anybody at all, as far as I know. It could be debated if most of the serial killers were in fact vampires, or real Satanists and witches, if they indeed do what is rumored that they do. The interesting thing is also that according to the Romanian lore, most of the people bitten by the vampire, if they were peasants, would die, but in Serbia most of them became vampires themselves. Now I don't know what that is supposed to mean. According to the Serbian lore, it would usually be the young poor man. It wasn't just one man, because there were many stories of such events occurring, who would deliberately allow himself to be bitten by a vampire, after he'd be waiting for him for nights on end at the abandoned mill. Traditional place for vampires to gather around in Serbia, in order to revenge to his undestined father-in-law, because he wouldn't give him his rich daughter as wife, with whom he had fallen crazy in love with, after he had been proving for years that he is a good worker in the fields and all. What I forgot to mention, is that vampires that were sought after by young peasants to bite them, in order so they would become vampires, were already couple of hundreds of years old. The older the vampire, the better, because old vampires can control their thirst, and very often when presented with the case of the young peasant, would even offer help, while the young vampires can't control their thirst and they suck every last one drop of blood from the victim, and then kill that way vampire wannabe before he even started his job. In that way Serbian lore is similar to Romanian. Who gets his last drop of blood sucked, that is who gets sucked dry, cannot get reborn as a vampire, so the young man would have kept the stake hidden somewhere in order to manage to stick it through the vampire's heart just before he'd suck the last drop of his blood. Just in case he met one of those unsympathetic vampires. And in Romanian folklore, where vampires are called strigoi, they live in caves unlike Serbian vampires, and they are usually 300, 600 or 900 years old. Weird, isn't it? Nikola Tesla, famous Serbian inventor and physicist, said that numbers 3, 6 and 9 hold the key to the mysteries of the universe. In some Serbian fairy tales we have old wise men that are living in caves and are also 300, 600 and 900 years old, and they are sought after by protagonist of the story for an advice, but it isn't mentioned anywhere that they are vampires. In Romanian case, it is very often the ruler, autocrat that goes to these vampires in order to beg them to bid him, so he could become physically stronger and wiser, and so that his senses would become increasingly heightened, so that he could defeat his enemies more easily. While the aristocrat is in the process of looking for this vampire that could help him, everybody points him to the various caves where vampires live in the vicinity, like as if everybody knows, but tell him that he should choose the one with the vampire that has 900 years, because he is the wisest, and can actually help him with his advice, and because he can control his thirst. They assure him that he would be sympathetic for his cause, turn him into the vampire, but stop before sucking the last drop of his blood, and that way won't kill him. And that's what Dracula, son of a dragon, according to the legend, did. He went to the oldest vampire, and from there on we know the story, although not entirely truthful. These are some names of the vampires or vampire-like creatures from all around the world. 1. Abjanchu, Bolivia. 2. Aber, Melanesia. 3. Abhardosh, England, variant, Merbio. 4. Ads, Ghana. 5. Alp, Germany. 6. Abudamkin, Quileute. 7. Asan Bosum, Ashanti people. 8. Isima, Suriname. 9. Azuman, Ashanti people. 10. Aswang, Philippines. 11. Aufhaker, Germany. 12. Iziman, Ashanti people. 13. Batal, India. 14. Baka, Haitian Voodoo. 15. Bantu, India. 16. Bauban Sith, Highlands of Scotland. 17. Buddha, India. 18. Kalakant Zaro, Greece. 19. Camazotz, Maya mythology. 20. Cihuateteo, Aztec mythology. 21. Chetapi, India. 22. Chupacabra, Puerto Rico. 23. Chirel, India. 24. Cihuacoatl, Aztec. 25. Cihuateteo, Mexico. 26. Tikanavar, Armenia. 27. Dilla, Philippines. 28. Draft, Norse variations, Aptganginir, one who walks after death, Granskjig, Hogbui, 29. Edamu, Sumer, Iraq with the following spelling variation, Okemu, 30. Empusa, ancient Greece which is also called Mormalekii, 31. History, Jewish tradition, 32. Fifle, United States, Louisiana, also spelled Fufale, 33. Gleistig, Scotland, 34. Garkane, Australia, 35. Ghoul, Arabic lore, 36. Hanya, Japan, 37. Hupia, Tano, 38. Impundulu, South Africa, 39. Incubus, Succubus, Medieval Europe, 40. Kappa, Japan with the following spelling variations, Gataro, Kawako, 41. Kichkandi, Nepal, 42. Kumaho, Korea, 43. Kukudi, Albania, 44. Les Dragones, Ancient Greece, 45. La Llorona, Central America and the United States, 46. Lamia, Libya, 47. Langsar, Malaysia, 48. Leenash, Ireland, 49. Lemures, Ancient Rome, 50. Lidecrc, Hungary, 51. Lilith, Sumer, Iraq, 52. Luguru, Caribbean Islands, Mauritius, 53. Lugat, Albania, 54. Manananggal, Philippines also spelled Tongal, 55. Mandorgo, Philippines, 56. Mara, Slavonic also spelled Mora, 57. Molo, Gypsy, Roma, 58. Moroni, Romania, 59. Nachzer, Germany with the following possible spelling variations: Noontoter, Nachtoter, 60. Obavufo, Ashanti, 61. Pelisit, Malaysia, 62. Penanggal, Malaysia, 63. Pugin, Chile, 64. Pickle Perry, India, 65. Pitches, Nepal, 66. Pishtako, South America, Peru, 67. Pontianak, Malaysia, 68. Rakshasa, India, 69. Revenants, England, 70. Striga, Albania, 71. Sukuant, Trinidadian, Guadeloupe, 72. Strigoi, Romania with the following variations: Striwica, Myroi, 73. Strix, Ancient Rome with the following spelling variations: Striga, Sturge, 74. Sturziga, Slavic, 75. Swangi, New Guinea, 76. Talamore, Australia, 77. Thaye, Burma with the spelling variation: Tassay, 78. Lowelpichi, Mexico with the following spelling variation: Tlachiques, 79. Upir, Poland, 80. Utuku, Iraq, 81. Wak Wak, Philippines, 82. Yama, Tibet, Nepal and Mongolia, 83. Yarama Yhahu, Australia, 84. Yaksha, Sri Lanka, India.